With Minecraft 1.17, we are finally getting a caving update, the Cave and Cliffs update. There's a ton of exciting new features in this upcoming update, but today we're going to focus all our attention on just one feature, the Sculk Sensor. If you're out of the loop, I'm going to explain what this is and what it does, but I'm also going to pitch an idea to you that could be the difference between this being a cool feature and this being an absolutely amazing feature. And then I'm going to show you some examples to really show you just how outstanding this new block could turn out to be. So subscribe if you like what you see. I will be your host, Simply Skulk, and let's explore Minecraft 1.17's Sculk Sensor. Let's begin with what this weird new block actually is. So the Sculk Sensor is a new redstone component that allows you to detect what the devs are describing as vibrations. This is very unusual because it's nothing like anything we've ever seen added to the game before. The Sculk Sensor can essentially hear any movement you or something else makes. If you create footsteps, the Sculk Sensor will detect the vibrations from that. If you place a block, it'll detect that too. Even stuff like projectiles will create vibrations. This is all heavily work in progress, but just the idea of that mechanic is nothing like what we've had in the game before. Let's explain why the idea of vibrations is so fundamentally different to everything else. Up until this point, we've basically only ever been able to detect really primitive things. Imagine a bud or an observer and how basic and restrictive those things are. All they can really tell you is a yes or no question. Was there a block update in this one specific block space? But there is so much more information and data in the Minecraft world that we're completely unable to interact with in survival. Now, this is only speculation on my part, but I'm going to assume this vibration system actually works based on sound events and Minecraft's sound engine. If it does, that is really cool. The sound engine is a completely separate system than, for example, the block grid or entities and particles. It exists on its very own plane. The way it works is when something needs to make a noise, a sound event is created at a specific coordinate. A great way to see this in action is if you turn on subtitles. You can actually see that the sound has its own place in the 3D environment. It's not just a noise played into your speakers. If you turn your head or move away from the source, the game keeps track of where the sound originated from. As shown in the Minecon demo, this means that a degree of wireless redstone is now possible. But depending on how this feature is designed, it could actually have enormous consequences on redstone and how it can interact with the Minecraft world. To properly explain my idea, let me show you, from what's been shown to us at least, why the Sculk Sensor needs just a little adjustment to take it from a cool feature to a fantastic one. When the wireless redstone was shown, that made me see a fatal flaw in the current iteration of the sensor. The Minecraft world is super noisy. Even with the wool occlusion mechanic, any vibration could interfere with this device. It would get set off randomly all the time. I started trying to come up with a solution, and my mind was quickly drawn to the idea of note blocks. What if you could actually use note blocks to send signals over to these Sculk sensors? The problem is, again, how would you differentiate them? You can't. All the sounds and vibrations would get muddled up, and they wouldn't be able to tell any of them apart. My first idea, and this felt like a good solution, was comparators. What if Sculk sensors actually output a stronger or weaker signal depending on the pitch of a note block? A lower tone would give off a weak signal, but the higher the pitch, the stronger the signal would become. This way you could transmit different tones over the airwaves, and the Skulks would interpret them differently. A Skulk set up to receive low tones would ignore the higher tones also being transmitted. This idea seemed really good. I think it's great when new features retroactively bring new life into older ones, in this case note blocks. But this feature could also be so much more than just wireless redstone, and the comparator idea kinda crumbles apart because of this bit. So I've spoken about the sound engine, but the reason that the whole sound system would be extremely interesting to be able to interact with is because there are so many game mechanics that are linked to sound events, and up to this point we've been completely unable to interact with them. Let me give you an example. If you have some food and you start eating it, you'll see that a munching sound event is created. Depending on how deep Mojang are going with this, technically that should create a vibration. And that vibration should be detected by the Sculk sensor. If that was true, then that means you can now detect a player eating. There's also another sound effect called burp that is created when a player actually consumes the food. So you can detect when a player is eating and also when they've actually eaten. I hope you can see how, even with just this one example, this is an absurd leap in the level of control we have over data and information going on in the world. You could never do anything like this in the current iteration of survival. But there's clearly a huge problem. Like I said earlier, how do you differentiate between sounds? The note block comparator idea works well together because that's more of an analog system. But when you start bringing in all the sound events, it starts making much less sense to use comparators to differentiate. A sheep, for example, has 3 types of sound events: an ambient bar, a hurt sound, and a death sound. Why should an ambient sound produce a redstone signal of 4, a hurt sound of 9, and a death sound of 13? There's little to no logic behind it. The 15 redstone levels just can't account for all the sounds in the game. We need something more targeted. So here's my idea. It was mentioned that the Sculk Sensor lives in the new deep dark cave biome. That's an odd word to use for a block. It implies that it's at least a little bit sentient, which gave me an idea. What if the Sculk Sensor could actually be tamed, sort of like a wolf or a horse? Now, it wouldn't work exactly the same way, but maybe the Sculk Sensor actually has likes and dislikes. What if you could train the Sculk to like and dislike different vibrations and sounds? Now, maybe this could actually use a drop by the new Warden mob, but here I'm using Crimson and Warped Fungi because the Sculk also seems like a fungus, and I figured that's the kind of food he, or it, would enjoy. Basically, you'd feed the Sculk the food he does like, in this case warped fungus, and this would trigger some kind of love mode. While he's in love mode, if you trigger a certain sound event, he'll give it a listen, and then bind himself to it, permanently. From that point, that Sculk will only ever respond to his favourite vibrations and ignore anything else. On the other hand, if you feed him the food he hates, he'll enter dislike mode, and any sound that's played whilst he's in it will make him despise that sound and make him ignore it forevermore. This idea is much more intuitive and allows you to target specific vibrations and blacklist others. I also think it'd be cool if you could bone meal the Sculk and make his ears grow larger and more sensitive. The bigger the ears, the larger the radius the Sculk Sensor can pick up vibrations. And if we still wanted to use comparators, maybe comparators could put out stronger or weaker signals depending on how far away the vibration was instead. So a vibration very close by would be very strong, but something further out would be weaker. So let me show you a few examples of how this feature might be used. Let's say you've got a base you want to protect and you want to defend it from Elytra-born players. The Sculk Sensor could be trained to detect the Elytra swoop sound effect, and when it picks up could release a bunch of your phantom minions on the attacker. Similarly, you may just want to know someone is in the area. You could set up a Ghast watchtower, and if he screams, which means he's seen a player and those guys have a huge line of sight, you can now actually translate that into a redstone signal and maybe set off an alarm or something. Perhaps you own a villager trading hall and want to make sure people are only allowed to buy 1 item per session because you're charging a per entry price. The villager trading sound event could trigger once you had, and then all the booths could be automatically locked. Or you have an animal farm and want to make your life a little bit easier when you're getting the steak. When your system detects the cow death sound, it could automatically dispense wheat because clearly you're going to need to do some repopulation. Perhaps you enjoy fishing. You could set up a system that detects the water splash sound, and that would alert you when it's time to reel in the line. If you like designing minigames in survival, you could use the hurt sound event to deduct points from player in some kind of arena game if they're supposed to avoid damage. Or if you have a dungeon crawler, maybe you could prevent doors from opening until you've hit a certain level, where the player triggers a sound event for every 5 levels they gain. If you wanted to disqualify players for cheating by breaking blocks or placing blocks, there are detectable sounds for those too. Or maybe you want your storage room to change depending on what you're doing. For example, if you equipped a netherite piece of armor, which has its own sound event like all armor, your base understands you're preparing for a fight and brings out the heavy artillery. These are just some examples I thought of, but I hope I've gone across why this sort of feature really could take the game to the next level. The Caves and Cliffs update is still quite far out, and Mojang have explained that they want to participate with the community to really get everything right. Now, this was just my 2 cents, and maybe there's a better solution, but I'd definitely like to know what your thoughts on it are. Or perhaps the whole thing will go in a completely different direction than what we're expecting. Either way, I'm really looking forward to this feature and whatever fresh mechanics it brings, not to mention all the other features on the horizon. But yeah, guys, thanks very much for watching. I've been Simply Sark, and I will catch you in the next one.